Welcome into the PFF NFL Podcast. Steve Palazzolo here with Sam Monson. We are live on YouTube on a Monday morning. And, of course, hello to all of our podcast friends. It's time to recap Week 17, maybe the entire season for some people, Sam.
Black Monday, Steve. Firings, bloodlettings. It's all happening. Everybody's getting canned. Everybody is to blame. We're here to dissect who's really to blame.
Who's really to blame?
For everything
I like
that just went wrong.
All right, I don't even know where to go with all this thing because we've got playoffs, we've got
the Vikings. The Vikings is where we go.
Okay.
They're the biggest screw-up of Sunday, Week 17.
Really?
Yes. They had a win-and-in game against the Chicago Bears, who really didn't have much to play for. And
They
blew
did,
it.
though. The Bears played.
Nah.
They had
Yeah, but they didn't really have much to play for.
they had a potential bye.
Yeah. Nah. Potential. It was contingent on the Rams blowing a game that
Against
they
the
were never
49ers.
really going to blow.
All right, let's discuss. All right, so we'll get to some of the blame game stuff, some of the Black Monday stuff, and then we'll talk about the teams that are still playing football as well.
Well, yeah, okay. But we'll do more of that later in the week when we actually preview the games.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. All right, let's start with the Vikings then.
Yes.
So,
Kirk Cousins, an
Take it.
$84 million flop, Steve. Discuss.
that's it. It's all his fault. All right, so how much of the blame? The easy take here
Yes.
is that it's all Kirk Cousins.
Yes.
Kirk is 5-25 against teams with winning records in his
Mm-hmm.
career and all this stuff. By the way, I think there is a little something to that. But when we isolate Kirk Cousins on the Vikings from the rest of the team, by the way, our guys at George and Eric, before the season, they said under 10 wins for the Vikings
Yeah.
is one of the best bets you can make. If you guys are into that sort of thing. If you're into gambling, under 10 wins. And it was less about Kirk Cousins and more about the depth of the NFC that we've talked about all year, the poor offensive line that was unable to get fixed in the offseason, and just general regression on the defensive side of the ball. And I think all of that came to fruition.
Yeah. So before we go into this, I don't want to make the case that Kirk Cousins is blameless in all this, because he isn't, right? And if you paid a guy $84 million over 3 years, you expect a certain caliber of play. And honestly, it's been that running joke all the way through the season. This is the game that they paid him the big money to win, right? And yesterday, honestly, was the game, right?
Oh, yeah.
It got kind of out of control. It was 2 scores. It was the game that you needed Kirk Cousins to come back and execute a something of a comeback. Otherwise, the season's done, and he couldn't get it done. But that's not to say that this idea that they paid Kirk Cousins that amount of money, they expect a top 5 quarterback, I think is wide of the mark. I don't think the Vikings were under any illusions that Kirk Cousins suddenly becomes Aaron Rodgers because they paid him $28 million a year. He's the same guy that he's always been, right? His PFF grade is going to be around 80 this year, which is basically what it's been all the way through his career. And he's going to rank somewhere around 15th in terms of quarterbacks.
Yeah, anywhere from 10 to 15.
Right,
in
which
a given
again
year.
is right in the middle of the lane that he's always been in, which is 10 to 20, somewhere in the middle of the pack amongst quarterbacks. You don't pay Kirk Cousins that money because you think Kirk Cousins is a great quarterback. You paid him that money because he is capable of executing a comeback or living with a high-powered offense in a shootout in a way they didn't think Case Keenum or Sam Bradford or Teddy Bridgewater were. That's what they paid him for. Now, that's not to say he's going to get that done every single week, and we've seen him at times this season not be able to get it done, but we've also seen him be able to get it done. The game against Green Bay where the kicker screwed him by missing 3 separate field goal attempts, etc. We have seen glimpses of what they paid Kirk Cousins, but his shortcomings this season are not amongst the highest problems the Minnesota Vikings face this season. The single biggest issue they've had all the way through this year and for a number of years now is a complete and total inability to form an offensive line that is capable of sustaining NFL-level play. Kirk Cousins yesterday was under pressure more in the Chicago Bears game than he was kept clean.
21-17?
Yeah,
Pressure
at the
to no
moment. We're
pressure?
still reviewing this game, so it could change by a snap or two here and there. But 21 snaps under pressure, 17 kept clean. That's not workable. You can't play quarterback at this level with that kind of pressure. It's just not possible over any sustained period of time. The Vikings' offensive line is horrendous. Pat Elflein is awful. Got his ass kicked in that game. Mike Remmers, Tom Compton also got their asses kicked in that game. At least, at the very minimum, the interior trio of the Minnesota Vikings are all backup level. None of those guys are capable of starting. Left tackle Riley Reif, he's kind of borderline. He might get you 8 games of average play, but when you come up against the top-level player, he's going to have problems. And then the one question mark is right tackle Brian O'Neill, who at the very minimum has not showed
some
that he
promise.
needs to be replaced yet.
That's
right?
the best thing you could say.
He was a sort of developmental prospect who's been thrust into action early and has not looked horrendous.
Right.
He's basically the one out of the 5 that you don't know you have to upgrade upon yet.
Riley Reif was supposed to be that creep back toward average, classic guy.
And he
I
still
don't
could
hate
be.
the moves. I don't hate the moves that they made 2 years ago to bring in Riley Reif and to bring in Mike Remmers. Because we always talked about, well, you just got to get back toward average. Those guys were like the epitome of average tackles.
They haven't been.
And they have not been at all. So that's where essentially they've missed.
I think Reif could potentially still be that if you had 3 better guys on the line. Like if the interior was fine,
right.
Brian O'Neill was your right tackle, and Reif was essentially your weak link at left tackle, it would be workable. Like I say, I think his form of average is an interesting one because I think against like bad to average opposition, he'll be fine. It's just that when it goes bad, it's going to go bad ugly. Yeah. You know, a guy like Khalil Mack is just going to destroy him, and it's not even going to be close.
And now Mack's in the division.
Yes.
As of record time, I mean, they're going to have the most pressures allowed in the NFL no matter what happens.
Yeah.
Over 225 pressures allowed by the Minnesota offensive line this year, just the offensive line.
Yeah.
And about 28th, 29th in per snap efficiency.
And anything over 200 is pretty catastrophic over a season.
In an offense that, you know, the offensive coordinator got fired because he wasn't running the ball enough and they were relying on the pass. So, you know, they're relying on the pass blocking every time you drop back.
So centers don't give up pressure, really, over a season. Typically, they're very rarely one-on-one with players. They don't give up an awful lot. Pat Elflein gave up 33 total pressures this season. Rodney Hudson for the Raiders gave up 5.
Man, that's rough.
Yeah.
I think when you look at the Cousins breakdown, though, if you look at his career, right, he came out of this Washington system that's always been pretty good on play action. Play action is one of the most inconsistent things that you do as far as stats go. But if there's one thing we've learned from play action is your stats are almost always a little bit better. Like play action stats overall versus non-play action stats are better. Mm-hmm. And it's not sometimes we make it sound too simplistic. Like, oh, just run more play fakes. It's not that simple. But sometimes it kind of is, right? Cousins 28th in play action percentage in the NFL. Let me check out where he was in Washington in his best seasons. You know, they were running a lot more.
There's very little reason to not run play action. You know?
Yeah.
Like,
and you don't need to
whatever about
the
how
run
much
and all that.
Yeah, whatever about how much it helps, etc. There's very little reason to not be doing it. It's just part of defense or part of offense rather.
There were some years where he was that low in Washington, but regardless, when you run play action, whether the run is established or not, you're just creating passing windows. You're moving linebackers. They have to respect it. They have to at least acknowledge that there might be a run here.
Yeah.
And that is one way. When you have a Kirk Cousins, who is a mid-tier quarterback, I mean, he's the same exact guy. He's probably going to land right at 15 in our grades for the season, just dead smack right in there. When you have a mid-tier quarterback, you have to steal as much off the edges as you can,
right?
Which is a little bit of extra play action, having good playmakers to make them look good, easier throws where playmakers can do things, quick throws to save them from the offensive line, that type of stuff.
If you look at this offense from a personnel standpoint, there is very little difference between the Minnesota Vikings offense and the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, with the exception that one of those teams has maybe the best offensive line in the game, and the other one has one of the worst offensive lines in the game. From a receiving personnel standpoint, it's pretty close. The Steelers have the better individual, but the Vikings might have a better group.
Well, and Big Ben's a much better quarterback than
a much better, but he's saying
overall.
Not this year. He hasn't been.
This year
he's been as volatile. They're very they're very similar stylistically, but Big Ben has a much better foundation to work from. Running back personnel, the Vikings are every bit the match. It's just you've got one team with a great offensive line, you've got another team with a disaster. So if you're talking about, the point I would make though is that this idea that because the Vikings paid Kirk Cousins huge money, he should be a great quarterback is just wide of the mark, right? He signed for that huge contract because he was the last quarterback available on the open market. That's just what happens.
Right.
Now, honestly, if anything, they got him for under market value. They paid less than the Jets were prepared to pay, and they paid less than the kind of ballpark contract everybody was talking about, because they gave him 100% of it guaranteed. It wasn't a $30 million a year deal. It was 28. It gives them the kind of money to still spend on free agents and offensive linemen, et cetera, et cetera. They got the player they thought they were going to get in Kirk Cousins. He did come up short in a couple of key situations, but if we're talking about a season autopsy on the Minnesota Vikings, primary cause of death is the offensive line, right? Secondary cause of death is the fact that the defense declined. Last year, Minnesota's Vikings defense was the number one unit in the league. It was historically good on third downs. This year, it was not. It couldn't stop the Chicago Bears from running right up the middle on them all yesterday, and that was a huge problem. Whatever about the offense struggling, the Bears were able to just pound Jordan Howard right up the middle on key downs, and the Vikings couldn't stop him. That is a major problem. They've had some injuries. They were playing without Eric Kendricks and Xavier Rhodes yesterday. That's an issue. But the Vikings' defense has not been anything like the unit it was a season ago.
This was my fear about their defense. This was it reminds me a little bit of the 49ers back in 2011, 12, 13, where they 2011 and 12, really. They had that really good defense, and they wouldn't sub anybody out. It was just like the starters. 13 guys saw snaps on that team, for 11 spots. That's what the Vikings felt like the last couple of years. They had their starters where top to bottom it was just as good as any team in the league, but the corner depth always worried me. If they had to tap into corner depth or linebacker depth or D-line depth like they'd had to this year, they didn't always have that next guy ready to go. I did feel like we saw some of that this year.
Well, what's ironic is I think the depth actually played pretty well. Like Mackenzie Alexander came on and started playing really well down the stretch. Holton Hill, who if you told me earlier in the season, Rhodes is going to go down, Holton Hill is going to come in and be one of your starting cornerbacks, I would have said that's a disaster waiting to happen. Holton Hill played pretty well. I actually think the depth held up pretty well. I just think we've reached a stage of the NFL now where you can't have the number one defense for 3-4 years running. It's just not possible.
Well, that's also it's dependent on who you're playing, is the point.
It's dependent on who you're playing, but I think it's what we've said all year long, that there is no dominant defense every single week. The best you can do is have a good enough defense that on any given week you can turn up well and be good. But it's too hard to sustain quality defensive play against this relentless onslaught of offense. I think you might be able to catch fire for a season and be really good on third downs and just everything clicks. I just don't think you can sustain that for 2-3 years running. So if that's what built you, look at the Jags, right? Two best defenses last year, the Vikings and the Jags, both took massive steps back, neither of which had any major catastrophic holes in personnel from a season ago, certainly earlier in the year. Both just fell off a cliff. You just cannot sustain that level of dominance for any period of time in today's NFL on defense.
And both teams needed their defenses to essentially play at the same level as last year.
Because that's what carried them.
Well, carry their offense. They need their offense carried.
If defense is what's carrying you to success in today's NFL, you have a major problem and a job to do in the offseason, because your offense needs to hold up its end of the bargain.
Let's wrap it up on Cousins a little bit. If the Vikings were looking to upgrade their quarterback position over their last, 3 starting quarterbacks, which was Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Bradford, and then Case Keenum, did they do it? Is Kirk Cousins an upgrade over Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Bradford, or Case Keenum, the 3 guys that they could have hypothetically brought back?
It's a hard question to answer, right? Because I think we said this way back in the offseason before they even signed him, that if you look at those 4 guys last year, Case Keenum, the peak grades of all those guys are about the same in PFF grades, right? They're all 80-ish, so if you're saying quality-wise, they're probably all about the same. Now, Kirk Cousins has durability benefits.
Cousins is a step better than those guys, though.
If he is, it's marginal, though. I think there's a very good case to be made that
definitely than Keenum.
That's because Keenum regressed, right?
No,
that's
Keenum was a one-year wonder.
That's what I'm saying. Peak Keenum, last year's grade for Keenum, if you assumed that within the same situation you would get the same guy next year, which in and of itself was probably not true. But peak Keenum, peak Bradford, peak Teddy Bridgewater, and then Kirk Cousins, those 3, I think those 4 are probably about the same level in terms of PFF grade. But Cousins has done it for longer, so you're not expecting the regression you were getting with Keenum. He's a durable quarterback. He's not got the injury history that Bradford has, and you don't have the question mark of what exactly Teddy Bridgewater is after the knee injury, et cetera, et cetera.
So ultimately, it's the
so
right
I think
move.
he's probably about the same level as those guys. There's just way fewer question marks. And then the other thing is, I don't think that was the point, was to necessarily upgrade overall. I think the point was, what happens when you get down 2 scores and the game plan changes and you have to bin the idea of the running game and it's all on the shoulders of the quarterback. They didn't think that those 3 guys could answer that, right? So the NFC Championship game, which very quickly went to hell, and the Vikings are suddenly in a 2-score hole, which became a 3-score, 4, whatever. In a big hole, you need a quarterback to bring you out of it. They knew that the 3 guys they already had could not overcome
Case
that.
Keenum's not making that
Right.
comeback.
They think Kirk Cousins at least has the ability to do that. That doesn't mean he's going to do it every time. And in fact, it turns out there's quite a few times he doesn't do it. But he has done it,
Well,
and that's what they pay for.
He hasn't done it that much, and this is the issue, right?
So tertiary cause of death, Kirk Cousins.
There you go. So he's number 3.
Yeah.
All right. Let's wrap it up on Cousins. But I do think there is something to the fact right now. This will be, I think, the 3rd time in 4 years. His PFF grade is going to be much lower than his standing and just natural passer rating. He's going to be about 10th in I think he was 10th in passer rating. So he does have this knack. So I think in isolation, in a 1-year sample, we've been talking about this with Trubisky and Tannehill, your stats can look better than your grades, and you usually chalk it up to playmakers or luck or whatever it is. I do think Cousins has a knack for making his stats look good and still not making those big comebacks that they need and taking the chances that he needs and winning through the pass game. He has a way of making himself look pretty good statistically. I think that's the concern, and that kind of shows up in the record. Little Matthew Stafford. Stafford's got that similar stigma of not being able to beat good teams, but he shows up well statistically over the last couple of years. So I think that might be a little bit of a concern with Cousins.
Yeah, I think he does have that knack. There is definitely, and we've talked before about he has that tendency to have those brain fart seizure plays where something just snaps and he does something horrendous. That's always going to feed into the narrative of, he sucks, he's terrible. Only terrible quarterbacks would do that. It's like, yeah, but if you looked up his big-time plays this year, there are some phenomenal throws in there.
There's some great ones.
To Diggs, to Thielen. Like, he made some incredible plays in addition to the terrible bonehead ones.
In big-picture view, we said this the whole season, first 8 or 10 weeks of the season, he's got a passer rating of over 90, 95, 100 under pressure. He ends up the season at 83. We expected that regression. When you're under pressure that many times, over 200 times just from the offensive line alone, it's just unsustainable. And ultimately, an 83 passer rating was like 6th or 7th in the league. That's really good under pressure. It's unsustainable. That might even drop next year. So that's the thing is, if you're the Vikings trying to build around him, from a mathematical standpoint, you just say, look, we have to keep him clean 5% more, 10% more, just to get the same production out of him next year. And that's going to be the big question.
The Vikings this offseason need to attack their offensive line as hard as you could possibly attack it. They need to draft multiple offensive linemen. They need to bring in multiple offensive linemen in free agency. They need to fix one of the worst units in the league because they don't have a quarterback that's good enough to overcome one of the worst offensive lines in the league. Russell Wilson for years was able to overcome the terrible offensive line in Seattle, and now that he's actually got a better one, suddenly he looks really good.
Top 8 quarterbacks can do that. Mid-tier quarterbacks like Kirk Cousins need the perfect ecosystem.
Exactly.
That's what they need to focus on.
That has been their failing from a personnel standpoint for years now, and this is one of the biggest off seasons in that franchise for fixing that.
All right, where else do we want to move here beyond? We spent a lot of time on the Vikings.
Yeah.
Where else do you want to move? Any other autopsies? Quick ones.
Pittsburgh?
Yeah, let's go to the Steelers here. A weird season for the Steelers because I still think if they get into the playoffs,
right?
Look, I typed this out last night on Twitter. I tweeted it even.
Oh yeah.
The AFC quarterback situation this year, last year to this year. Last year it was Brady, Roethlisberger, and then Alex Smith, Marcus Mariota, Blake Bortles, Tyrod Taylor. This year it's Brady again. Both Mahomes, MVP Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson in that crazy offense, Phillip Rivers, and now Andrew Luck. So if Big Ben was in there for Lamar Jackson, like Lamar's still got question marks as a passer. Imagine if Big Ben was in the playoff picture. When you have they're all top 10 quarterbacks production-wise. So if you have Big Ben in that mix, they're as dangerous as anybody. So weird year for the Steelers where they're a scary team if they're in the playoffs, but they're not in.
Right. And really it's just come down to the fact that, it's depending on which way you look at it, right? Either the fact that they randomly laid eggs against terrible teams, Oakland, etc.,
Yep.
or that they were just not quite able to beat a couple of good teams. They lost a really close game to the Saints. They lost to the Chargers.
Right.
Depending on which way you want to focus, they've either nobody but themselves to blame because they really should be beating Oakland, or they were just not quite good enough to get it done against teams that they're going to have to beat if they get to the playoffs anyway. But those games showed that this team is well capable of beating those teams if they got to the playoffs. I think the AFC ended up being as chaotic as the NFC in terms of pretty much any of the teams that get in there can make some noise.
Yeah.
Like the Chargers are one of the best teams. They're in as a wild card.
Because they all have viable quarterbacks and reasonable defenses.
The Ravens, we've said, are a horrible matchup for most of these high-powered offensive teams. And then the Steelers, had they made it, I think could go toe-to-toe with any of those high-powered passing teams. And have shown, at least against the Patriots, that they're capable of crafting a one-off game plan to stop them. Now, they only did it once, but they've at least shown they're able to.
I haven't run numbers on the Steelers' schedule, but it looks difficult. I mean, when you just look at it, right? It's a pretty difficult schedule because they had to play the AFC West, which included the Chiefs and the Chargers this year, of course. And then when you're playing the first-place schedule, you have to play New England and you have to play Jacksonville, who won their division. Now, they won both of those games, but the grind of they lose to the Raiders, which was their own fault. That's bad, right? But it's at Oakland, whatever. But then the next week they had to play New England and New Orleans, right? And they put everything into beating the Patriots and then had to come back the next week and go to New Orleans and try to beat them in the Dome. It's just a tough schedule. In the AFC West, when they had to play Denver, they had to play them on the road. They lost there. They did a good job against the NFC South because on paper, going against the Falcons, the Panthers, and the Saints and Bucks, those aren't easy games. The Bucks gave them a really good game. They had to play the Ravens twice. So in the Browns with Baker once and with Tyrod the other time. So, look, it's not an easy schedule.
Right. I mean, they put up 37 points against the Chiefs, came off second best. They, came off a 33-30 loss to the Chargers. Like, it is a tough schedule. All right. I like this system, right? Primary cause of death for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year, Steve.
Honestly, I think there was some Roethlisberger regression that hurts them.
You want to know if you were
Le'Veon Bell?
No, not doing that. But with the final games still to get reviewed, etc., Kirk Cousins has a higher grade than Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah, so this is where I don't know if it was all Big Ben. So it depends on how you look at it. Big Ben, from a positively graded throw standpoint, I think ended up top 5. So when you talk about a value add guy,
right,
extremely good. But if you look at the throws that he missed this year, and this is where this is important, why we say his playmakers helped him a lot. He had so many open throws that he missed this year, meaning his guys were getting open. He threw for over 5,000 yards, and it could have been way better, right? So the production ended up getting there, but it was very inefficient along the way. Big Ben had a ton of turnover-worthy plays, got away with a bunch, still threw a bunch of key interceptions, and he had the highest percentage of misses in years. So, yeah, I know it's tough to add up directly from you don't have it.
But how much is that? I mean, how different is the perception, right? It's Kirk Cousins is an $84 million flop. He's been a disaster. He's the reason the Vikings are sitting at home. And who is talking about Big Ben being the reason the Steelers are sitting at home? Roethlisberger has a worse grade
we threw for 5,000
than Kirk
yards,
Cousins.
Sam.
He has a worse grade than Matthew Stafford, who people are talking about being a disaster this year. He's got a worse grade than Andy Dalton. Roethlisberger was not good this year. He is the reason that Antonio Brown had a down year. Like, he was just missing Antonio Brown, an absolute ton. Now, the Antonio Brown down year talk has gone away a little bit as well because he got a bunch of touchdowns. But Antonio Brown's grade this year has been a disaster compared to the previous seasons because Roethlisberger was missing him. And you can't get a good grade, essentially, without the quarterback helping you out on the back end because he's the guy putting the ball where you need to get it.
So I think a big part of it is you look at Roethlisberger's grades week 1 through 5, they were bad. He was among the bottom 4 or 5 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. He did get better down the stretch. Did have a bunch of good games. But even the Oakland game, he made the big comeback with injury. The grades were showing him throwing the ball through defenders that were getting caught for touchdowns. So the ultimate production got there. So here's the thing. That's why I don't think Big Ben himself, I don't think the bad grade hurts the team that much. As much as because the ultimate production got there because Juju stepped up and was great.
Right.
And because Vance McDonald stepped up and was great.
The other thing that differentiates Cousins, so while the grades are similar, average to Kirk Cousins was among the 5 most pressured quarterbacks in the NFL. Roethlisberger was the least pressured quarterback in the NFL.
A much better situation.
So again, like we said before, there isn't that much difference between those two offenses, except one has the best offensive line in the league, the other one has a terrible one. And this year, the quarterback situation was pretty much the same, except Roethlisberger made more big-time throws, but then he also had a dramatically better platform to work from.
I still think ultimately, and that's fair, it's still their defense.
So you're going primary cause of death, the defense?
Yeah, because when they needed the defense, Saints 31 points and Chargers 33 points, and they had a great game against New England. They figured that out.
Well, they threw everything
42,
at that.
But like when they had to, essentially, yes, they put everything into the Patriots game plan that week. But when they had to shut down a good offense, and this is what we're saying, defense is often dependent on who you're playing. What can you do to slow down the Chiefs? They couldn't. Mahomes had 6 touchdowns against them. They couldn't slow down the Saints when they needed to. They couldn't slow down the Chargers when they had that huge lead. Ultimately, it's this defense, kind of similar to the Patriots. They pretty much do a good job beating up on bad QBs and bad situations, but when they face the good guys, very rarely are they throwing out that New England game where they played well.
Yes, that is true. If you were identifying the problem with the defense, what would you say it is?
I still think it's on the back end. They started to get more, like Watt was really good. TJ Watt was really good getting pressure in the second half of the season, but they don't get pure edge pressure the way the really good Steelers defenses did back in the day. It was James Harrison and Lamar Woodley, consistent pressure off the edge.
3 first-round picks into this, only one of them has turned out okay.
Right. Bud Dupree still has an issue and all that stuff, but still like on the back end, inconsistency from Sean Davis. I know Terrell Edmonds was better than we expected, but still not worth really a first-round pick just yet. Joe Hayden did some nice things, which was great, but when you had to throw Cody Sensabaugh out there, he was up and down. There's too many questions on the back end.
Yeah.
Artie Burns struggled when he was out there.
There really isn't enough talent on this defense, and when you face the best teams or the best offenses in the NFL, it's typically exposed. You've also got to question the fact that their defensive coordinator didn't appear to know who he was about to face in Week 17. He was concerned about how they were going to cover Tyler Eifert.
Both Tylers.
Who'd been on IR. Yeah, so we were like, oh, he obviously just misspoke. Half the Bengals roster is called Tyler.
The Steelers.com guy took the blame for a bad interview and setting him up with
he would,
bad research.
Wouldn't he? Steelers.com?
Well, it was a bad interview. It was poorly researched.
Well,
I've made mistakes before in my life too, but that was a poor one.
Right. So we were like, oh, it's obviously half the Bengals offense is called Tyler. He obviously meant Tyler Kroft, the replacement for Tyler Eifert, also on IR. Okay, maybe he meant Tyler Boyd, receiver in the slot, been incredible this season, also on IR. There was no actual Tyler who was healthy at that point in the season who could have played in Week 17. So it was basically an unsavably bad mistake. Now, the idea that, okay, he wasn't the guy that brought it up. He didn't unprompted say, yeah, this Tyler Eifert guy is going to be a problem. Somebody asked him about Tyler Eifert. So, yes, the Steelers guy, the Steelers.com guy, screwed up in that he asked him about a guy who wasn't healthy. Having said that, you would kind of expect the guy preparing to face that opposition to say, I'm going to stop you there, Chief. Tyler Eifert's been on IR for a couple of months.
You would expect it.
And his replacement, Tyler Kroft, also on IR. And, in fact, the other Tyler in that offense, Boyd, also on IR. So I can't do anything with that question. But, no, he rolled with it and just, that's going to be an issue.
Wasn't good.
It's going to be an issue.
So I would say cause of death for the Steelers was more the defense.
But legitimately, that plays into those games like the Chargers game where Keenan Allen in the slot is like kryptonite. They don't know what to do with him.
Yeah, they had linebackers covering him the entire time.
And I get that you might roll into a game that way, but you know that's an issue coming in and you'd make an adjustment because you had a game plan for it. If you don't know who the opposition is or what they do, like how are you supposed to stop them?
Cause of death defense.
Primary
laying
cause
an
of
egg.
death.
Primary cause of death. Laying an egg against the Oakland Raiders.
Secondary cause of death.
Secondary.
Tertiary?
That's Big Ben.
Big Ben.
Because they,
Okay.
as well as he played down the stretch, struggles early in the season. That's when they were losing games and tying games. Better Big Ben play, and they're in the playoffs.
So Big Ben, the same tertiary cause of death as Kirk Cousins.
Just like Kirk Cousins.
Yeah,
They're
perfect.
the same guy.
Excellent.
What about the Atlanta Falcons?
Wow, yeah.
Cause of death, Atlanta Falcons?
Cause of death.
Defense.
Yeah. The complete and total inability to cover anybody.
So if you're looking at them from a, high-end view here, they covered extremely well in Week 1 against Nick Foles
Yes, they did.
in Philadelphia. Since then, though, since Week 1,
Yeah.
that's when they got torn up. Giving up 43 to the Saints in Week 3, 37 to the Bengals in Week 4. I understand every last point's not on the defense, but look at these point totals. 41 against the Steelers, 29 against the Bucs in a win, 28 against the Browns, 31 against the Saints again on Thanksgiving night, 34 against Green Bay, just gave up 32 yesterday against the Bucs. But then, like these other mid-tier to poor defenses, you could sneak some good games in there. So when you play Josh Rosen and the poor Arizona Cardinals, you give up only 14, including a defensive touchdown, right? So so they did a pretty good job there. Gave up 14 against Alex Smith and the Redskins. That was still Alex Smith that week, right? So, yeah, they snuck in a couple decent games in there, but that defense overall could not cover.
No.
Primary cause of death for the Falcons.
Inability to cover.
Inability to cover.
Yeah.
They remained one of the worst teams for us to predict anything for because, so look, you lost Deion Jones, top 2-3 coverage linebacker in the NFL.
Big problem.
You got regression on the back end from guys like Robert Alford. Robert Alford had this knack for just, sitting around league average. He's below average this year. Pass rush was inconsistent. So this roster that they've been building that looked good in a whole bunch of spots. Young players on the D-line, young players at linebacker, some pretty solid players in the secondary. But, Keanu O'Neal injury, just things started to fall apart on this defense that looked like it was in really good shape coming into the season.
It did. I think the Deion Jones loss was a major one.
Yeah.
I was talking of his return for about a month.
He disappointed you.
Yeah, he did. Kept continually disappointing me. But he's a guy that can change defenses. He changes schemes. He's got that kind of range, that ability to completely adjust things. And when he's not there, it is a major loss because the cornerbacks, the secondary guys are not quite good enough to overcome that. So, yeah, I think that was a big one. Definitely the primary cause of death for this team.
Yeah, and, offensively, if you remember the start of the season, they couldn't score in the red zone. What's wrong with Matt Ryan in the red zone and blah, blah, blah. And then they figured it out. They made some adjustments. In the red zone, they started scoring a little bit better. Matt Ryan ended up having a good year. Again, he keeps teetering back and forth between us telling you guys he's playing better than the stats would show. He's playing worse. He's playing better. He's playing worse. He didn't play as well as the stats would show this year, but the ultimate production was good because of Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, and what Calvin Ridley brought to the table.
Can I give you another one? In addition to just a basic inability to cover people, if you're not going to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves on defense, that's going to be an issue. The Atlanta Falcons this season had 13 dropped interceptions, which was the most in the NFL.
So that's why ultimately their coverage grades weren't horrible. They got in position to do things, but when you can't get if you cut that in half, and you have 6 or 7 of those that you catch that are turnovers, and you're killing drives and you're giving your offense more of a chance, obviously that's going to change a lot of things too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are the single greatest stat that everybody always knows that's, bears relation to actually winning and losing games is the turnover margin.
Right.
And if you're not going to catch the passes that are thrown your way, that's going to be a problem.
That has been an absolute issue. The offensive line took a step back when it comes to pressure percentage. Matt Ryan was pressured the 17th highest pressure rate in the NFL. That was last year's. He was 17th. Let me check out this year's.
Okay, yeah, you do that.
But
that's
the offensive line
relevant.
grades were way down. This year he's 17th again. How about that?
Huh.
So the pressure percentage wasn't as bad, was the same, but the grades were lower, meaning pressure's coming quicker.
So primary cause of
That's
death, total lack of ability to cover anyone and dropping the picks when you were in position. Secondary cause of death?
That's it. That's one
That's
answer.
it. Just the cause of death.
That's one
The only
answer.
cause of death for the Falcons was their defense and their coverage.
Can I also just chalk it up to the depth of the NFC?
Sure.
I mean, you got to play the Saints twice. You had to play the Eagles, coming off their high. Had to go to Pittsburgh.
What about secondary cause of death, Matt Ryan playing outside?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Outdoor Matt Ryan.
There you go.
Oh, he saved it a little bit yesterday in Tampa Bay.
Well, that doesn't
I got to
count.
see what
It's
the
Tampa
final.
Bay. It's not true outside.
True. His grade in outdoor games, which was about 7 of them, I believe, 6 or 7, was low 60s tops. I got to rerun the numbers.
Yeah.
Low 60s PFF grade when he was right around 90 playing indoors.
Yes.
Huge drop off. So 7 games out of the season.
And I'd throw away the Tampa Bay game because that's Florida outdoors. That doesn't really count.
It's true, unless it's torrential rain. How many outdoor games? 1. So at Philadelphia, Matt Ryan was not good. At Pittsburgh, Matt Ryan, horrible again. Key fumble at the end. At Washington, he had 4 touchdowns that traveled an average of 1 yard in the air. So he had 4 touchdowns that had nothing to do with him. Didn't necessarily play well that game, but they won. At Cleveland, Matt Ryan was not good. Where else? At Green Bay, Matt Ryan was not good. Had a pick 6. At Carolina in Week 16, he was okay. And then at Tampa Bay yesterday. But, the season was over by the time, he solved his outdoor issues.
Who else is the biggest deserving of an autopsy, a post-mortem on their season?
Oh, let's see.
Let me give you some candidates, and you can tell me which one we're going to go with. Green Bay, Tennessee, obviously just blew theirs last night. Washington, I guess.
They're less interesting.
Or Carolina, who you wrote off when they were 6.
Carolina
6-2.
is what I thought they were. I think Green Bay's the interesting one. I also think the Giants are at least worth a discussion.
Oh, I bet you do.
So let's go to the Packers. Autopsy on the Packers.
Yep.
The defense under Mike Pettin did not take the step forward that they thought. We talk about Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins being the only 2 guys. There are other guys grading well in the Green Bay offense, but if you look at the receiver grades, it's Devontae Adams and no one else.
Yeah.
And Rodgers had this incredible season of he made a lot of good throws. He didn't make a ton of disastrous throws, but he didn't have a lot of value add throws. So positively graded throws. We talk about Big Ben. If you're going to get to this mid-tier grade, you better do it by adding a ton of value. So if you're missing 1 out of every 3 throws, it's not great. You want to play better than that, or 1 out of every 2 throws. But if you're moving the chains, you can offset it a little bit. That's Big Ben. So it doesn't feel as bad. Rodgers didn't have that. He had key misses at the wrong times. So the overall grade was good, but a million throwaways. He didn't trust the scheme. So I think, even though he graded well, he left a ton of value on the table. Either not playing within the scheme, not trusting his receivers, taking too many sacks. He left a ton of potential value and production on the table.
Yeah.
But the primary cause of death has to be on the other side of the ball.
Yeah. I think injuries took a real hammer to this team.
Yeah.
And they, again, were forced into depth pretty quickly and didn't have the depth.
Right.
So they're a bit like the Falcons, and I think their primary cause of death was coverage, but for a different reason. I think the Packers relied on a lot of very young players, and they flashed a lot of ability. Guys like Jair Alexander, their first-round corner, looks like he could be a potential star going forward.
Yeah.
But he was also exposed at times, as you'd expect for a rookie cornerback.
Yeah,
it
right.
happens, right? Now, this has happened to Green Bay before. They drafted a couple of young cornerbacks a few years ago in Demarius Randall and Quentin Rollins, and both those guys as rookies had some really impressive plays and flash and looked like they would be stars going forward. They graded well in limited sample size, and then that just fell off a cliff. Now, the big question for Green Bay going forward is what happens to their young players next time? Do they get the same thing, or do these ones actually pan out?
The warning there that we always try to give fans is that player progression is not the way it is in Madden.
Right.
Oh, he's a 78 this year. He'll go +2. Then he'll go +3. He'll hit his peak in year. It doesn't always just go linear. They get better. I do like Jair Alexander. I do like Josh Jackson. We liked them coming out. We like their future. But they've invested a ton at the corner position, which, by the way, is the right way to build a team. We talk about this, right? You just keep throwing resources at cornerback. But Kevin King was this high upside type of guy 2 years ago, only plays 304 snaps. He gets banged up and everything, and he's not great when he's on the field. They've thrown a ton of resources at the cornerback position, and right now it looks like Jair Alexander has the best future. That was their first-round pick this year, but there's a lot of question marks, around him. And the linebacker position pretty much continues to be a major issue for them. Blake Martinez, when healthy and on the field, does some nice things, but they haven't had a really good linebacking core for a while. But the thing we liked about them was the potential of having Muhammad Wilkerson helping. He only played 115 snaps.
Right.
Kenny Clark took that next step. But the idea, Mike Daniels took a little bit of a step back and only played 419 snaps. The idea coming in was that, Kenny Clark, Mike Daniels, a rejuvenated, motivated Muhammad Wilkerson is going to aid that young secondary. And other than Kenny Clark, we didn't really see that this year.
Yeah, and it looked like it could. Wilkerson played well before he went down. Then injury robbed, again, like I said, injury robbed them of a potentially very significant playmaker on the defensive line. I think that would have panned out pretty well. And he was a guy who was kind of vital to that Pettin-style scheme back with the Jets, a guy that could move across the line, play every one of those positions along that defensive front, and be a really disruptive player. And we just didn't get to see it because we got robbed of him. And same kind of story on offense, which is it was Devontae Adams, and then we had to cycle through all the rookie wide receivers, and we just didn't get to see Rodgers build up any kind of trust level and chemistry with anybody outside of Devontae Adams.
Devontae was spectacular. I was looking at some numbers recently too, as far as because we track all this stuff. Single coverage, how many times was he targeted when he was open? Devontae Adams, most in the league. So I do think a lot of people like to blame Mike McCarthy for this whole thing, right? It's his scheme, it's too conservative and all this stuff. And we have posed the question, what if it was Aaron Rodgers? I think it's okay to have a nuanced discussion about this, right? I think Aaron Rodgers was to blame for some of the stuff. I'm sure Mike McCarthy and just, a stale offense was part to blame. I don't think the solution, while I think Rodgers is a fantastic quarterback to build around, and every good offensive coordinator should want to work with him in Green Bay, I also don't think that just getting the next creative offensive mind in there is this perfect quick fix. You get Rodgers back up to throwing 50 touchdowns and all that stuff. I don't know that it's going to be that easy. I think Rodgers was to blame for some of this stuff.
The Packers are going to be one of the most fascinating teams in 2019 because whoever comes in, you have to assume that they're going to have some kind of new vision for the offense. And we're going to see two things. One, how prepared Aaron Rodgers is to accept somebody else's ideas. This is what I want to do. This is what the offense is going to need to look like. This is how you need to play within it. First of all, how willing he is to do that. And secondly, what that looks like.
Yeah.
Like Rodgers being bent into some other offense. What does Aaron Rodgers look like outside of this Mike McCarthy offense and in this new idea scheme? Or if we're going to start to see, actually next year he is a significant part of the issue.
There's some nuanced stuff to this too, because remember when McAdoo left Green Bay and went to the Giants,
right?
And he completely changed, just like Eli's stance in the shotgun. We got to go left foot in front of right foot. So he changed his stance. There's some footwork, nuanced stuff that is in this McCarthy-McAdoo offense that is very different from the rest of the NFL. And it was a lot of quick hitters, slant flat, and maybe they overdid it with some of the stuff. But there's a lot of things that are different. I wonder how much the new offensive coordinator comes in and says, all right, we'll keep the same footwork, but we're going to run more 5-step instead of 3. I'm just very curious to know how this goes. But primary cause of death, do we call it injuries?
Yeah.
Or just defense?
I would roll with injuries. I think they lost a lot of talent overall.
Injuries
really hurt them.
Secondary cause of death. Secondary.
Yeah, secondary was the secondary cause of death.
And I don't think Rodgers is the cause of death. I think the passing game as a whole just deserves blame.
Yeah.
Inefficiency of the passing game, a little bit of Rodgers' fault, but he still graded really well. I mean, when you get that PFF grade and you're able to make those big-time throws and not turn the ball over, like you should be efficient, but the inability to just find positive plays and positive plays and positive plays wasn't there, and that's a receiver and quarterback issue in my mind.
Right. I mean, the idea that Jimmy Graham was going to come in, catch 10 touchdowns just because of the red zone skills he has and Rodgers hitting him with those back shoulder throws. Jimmy Graham was a disaster this year. 2 touchdowns. He had 55 catches, but he graded poorly. Didn't look like the player he's been in the past. He did look like the guy who was done up in Seattle, but at least Seattle figured out that he could just be a jump ball weapon in the red zone. He couldn't even do that this year. That connection didn't work. So it really was just Rodgers to Adams and whatever they could fashion on the ground with Aaron Jones, etc. Yeah, the passing game was poor, and it obviously wasn't just Rodgers, but yeah, tertiary cause of death, the listless passing game.
All right, let's do one more autopsy.
All right.
That good? Giants?
Okay.
All right. The New York Giants, why did they only win, 6 games? 5 games?
Because they're not good.
Would they win 5 or 6?
5.
Okay, 5. Because we talk about preseason bets. We liked the Falcons. We were over. We didn't like. We nailed the Vikings under. The Giants, we liked them under 7. If for nothing else, just playing in the loaded NFC is going to make it difficult. There's no sign that Eli Manning was going to take a step forward at quarterback. And as well, I don't know how to phrase this any better. Like Saquon Barkley was a spectacular running back this year, but when you have no other supporting cast, it doesn't move the needle.
Yeah.
So you can have mid-tier Kirk Cousins and win 8 games, 9 games or whatever, and you can have spectacular Saquon Barkley, but if you have a bad quarterback, you're at 5 wins. You know, that's the issue.
So there was a certain degree of speculation as to what Eli Manning would look like in 2018 with Pat Shurmur's offense coming in, given what he just did in Minnesota, with the weapons that now surround him. We've got Saquon, we've got Odell Beckham, we've got Sterling Shepard, we have Evan Ingram. We've got talent in this offense. We've got weapons for him to throw to. We've just seen what Pat Shurmur was capable of doing to Case Keenum and the Vikings, who themselves didn't have a good offensive line last year. There was the idea that Shurmur took a look at Eli himself. First thing he did in the building, watched every throw from Eli from 2017 and said, Eli still got it. I can work with this, right? So at the very minimum, it was this unanswered question heading into the season of how much better could Pat Shurmur make Eli look given all these weapons. The answer has been not at all better, and in fact, if anything, worse. So Eli Manning's grade this season is 65.5, which is slightly lower than 2017 and slightly higher than 2016, but basically continues the downward trend we've seen for the past decade since his 2011 season, which was his best. So we've got 2011, really good, elite. 2012, very good. And then a steady downward spiral from 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Basically, at this point, the question is answered. Eli Manning has declined. He is done. He is not capable of being a top-quality quarterback, and you need a new one, right? Now, you didn't take one last year, which most people would suggest was the move, but whatever. You now need one. The very minimum. The team has answered that.
But he had a 91.6 passer rating. So when you look at things in isolation,
so did everybody.
But that's the thing. When you were looking at it in isolation, you're like, wow. There was a point where Eli's putting up the best numbers of his career. He finished with a 91.6 passer rating, 23rd in the NFL.
Right.
And his PFF grade is going to land even lower than that as far as pure rankings go.
Ryan Tannehill had a 92.7 passer rating, and he was terrible.
He was our lowest graded quarterback in the NFL. This is the year. So this is the thing about offense these days is through scheme and through playmakers and stuff, despite the offensive line and with the Giants, we'll talk about how bad they were as well. But if you have the good enough playmakers, if you have Odell Beckham carrying you, you could put up some decent numbers.
Right.
Eli still has some pretty good throws in the bag. It's just the consistent. That's the thing. He's very similar to Josh Rosen. So earmuffs, Arizona Cardinals fans. I still think Rosen has some high-end play in him.
Yeah.
But Eli, throughout his career, he throws a nice ball. He does NFL things really well. Jameis has some of this too. All these volatile quarterbacks. They all do NFL things. Like I could pull out Eli's best throws from this year, and you're like, wow, this guy still has it. I could see, if Shurmur's watching the right plays, I could see him saying that Eli still has it.
Yeah,
is that fair?
Apparently he watched all of his plays.
Okay. Well, if you pull out the right ones, he still has it. He throws with anticipation. He has enough arm to get it out there sometimes. It's just not consistent. He's got touch. He throws the seam. He does all these things. Red zone accuracy, right? If you look at the right ones, you're like, hey, Eli still has it. But sometimes when just like a good thrower of the football can kind of like, mask his deficiencies, there's far too many turnover-worthy plays. His interception luck was ridiculous. Where did he finish in turnover-worthy throws? I see you got it.
He had
pulled up
25 of them, which was the most by
the most.
5.
25. Yet he only threw 12 interceptions. So he had a ton of interception luck. He still doesn't have the consistent accuracy outside the numbers or down the field that he had in his peak seasons. So quarterback's not about your high-end plays. It's about the how often. How often do you have those high-end plays? Like Big Ben has a ton of high-end plays, so you can deal with some of the misses. Eli just doesn't have enough of those high-end plays.
Right.
So ignore the fact that he threw for almost 4,299 and 21 touchdowns and 91.6 passer rating. He was a well below league average quarterback.
Well, that explains your disparity between passer rating and grade. Is that he had 11 interceptions, which is a pretty good number. It's lower than most quarterbacks in the NFL, but he led the league in turnover-worthy plays by 5, which means an absolute ton of those plays that should have been turned over were not, because we saw defenders dropping passes. The Falcons with their 13 dropped interceptions. Those are plays that are objectively terrible by the quarterback, and over the long haul, they will cost you badly, but you didn't get punished for them on this occasion. Right. We are grading those as if they were turnovers because the fact that they weren't had absolutely nothing to do with the quarterback. He basically put the ball in a defender's hands and therefore deserves a terrible grade whether the defender caught it or not.
It's also how these games come about. He has a disastrous game against Tennessee. I know it was raining, but it was well worse than you're expecting the quarterback to throw the ball in the rain. Struggled against Chicago despite them pulling that out. Struggles against Washington, against Philadelphia, against New Orleans at home in what was a tight game. So there's just too many below average games. He kind of had a Bortlesy season. Like if you just sort, like if I sort by his best games, there's 6 games, 7 games in there we played pretty well. And there's enough games in there, just like a Bortles, where you're like, oh, he's a reasonable NFL quarterback, but it's a 16-game schedule. Good quarterbacks mitigate the bad games, and they only have maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 of them at most.
So, primary cause of death for the New York Giants, Eli? They just don't have a good enough quarterback.
Okay, let me start with Eli, but I also think that the defense was just
Well, here's the
good.
thing, right? So the point we're always trying to make is that Saquon Barkley has been fantastic. I actually think Saquon Barkley has been better as a rookie than most people thought he would, even the people that thought he was special. But the point has always been that he cannot play well enough for it to be the right decision to take him at 2 over a quarterback. He's just not. The best he could do was be a higher volume version of Alvin Kamara a year ago. And I think there's actually an argument to say he kind of was.
He was close.
He was pretty close to being as good as Kamara was, only on dramatically more snaps.
But even that value is still QB dependent.
And that's the point, is that he can't play well enough. There is nothing he could do for it to be the right call to take him over a quarterback and number 2. And the people defending it would say, well, why would you not get a generational talent like Saquon Barkley and take the quarterback the next year? And then you have the best of both worlds. And the answer is because the best quarterback next year just said, you know what, screw the NFL. I'm going to stay in college for a year, and I'm happy at Oregon.
Well, here's the
so
other
Justin
issue,
Herbert go back to college, and now you're left what? What's the plan now?
Let's look at it at a very extreme view. Even if Herbert doesn't go back, let's say Dwayne Haskins. Let's say they get Dwayne Haskins, and he ends up being pretty good.
Okay.
The issue is the finding of the quarterback is the most important thing.
Yes.
So if your option was, I could draft Sam Darnold, and let's say in year 1 he's not even the guy, and then in year 2 you have another top pick and you draft Dwayne Haskins. Very extreme. You've just drafted Sam Darnold and Dwayne Haskins back-to-back years. Those 2 picks are far more important that you just hit on that you can up your odds to hit on one of those 2, and then to replace Barkley's production, as awesome as he is much easier to do.
Yeah.
Because there's Philip Lindsays of the world who go undrafted.
But
there's Nick Chubbs who go in the second round.
So finding the quarterback
issue.
is the most important thing, and the issue is maximizing the percentage that you're actually going to do that with where you're doing it. So the reason taking Saquon at 2 and then finding the quarterback next year is a terrible idea is you don't know what position you're going to be in the next year and how the lay of the land is going to be.
Right.
So now, like, where are the Giants in the draft order right now with 5 wins?
Well, they're in the top 10, but they're probably 5, 6,
Right.
7.
So they're not. Last year they were number 2, right? That was the highest position they'd been since 1981. So they were not going to repeat that and get a number 2 pick again. You also had 5, 6 quarterbacks, depending on who you listen to, that people thought were potential franchise guys, right?
6 right now, I think.
Only one of whom you weren't going to have the shot at, right? If you assume the Browns take one at 1, you would then have the choice of any of the remaining top-level quarterbacks.
Right.
Now you're 6 overall, and who knows what's left. The top quarterback on everybody's board, most people's boards, is going back to school. So you may have one quarterback that anybody that needs a quarterback is shooting for. If somebody takes him number 1, you're screwed. I mean, you've no option. You're back to, well, okay, I don't think any of these guys is the option, but I have to take one because I just boxed myself into a corner. So it's just a bad way of doing it. You had a uniquely good opportunity to take a franchise quarterback, and the only way it makes no sense whatsoever is if you said, I believe there's only Baker Mayfield from this draft as a franchise quarterback. The rest of them are all non-viable, and even then it's probably worth taking the shot in case you're wrong, such is the importance of the quarterback position.
So that's the thing, because the pushback we've gotten is, well, Sam Darnold hasn't proven anything this year.
And he hasn't.
Josh Rosen hasn't. But just like the upside of hitting is so much greater than the risk of missing. That's the issue. If you hit on Darnold, it's worth so much more.
Darnold right now has probably not been any better than Eli. And I think if he was with the Giants this year, they would probably be in the same situation. They would probably be a 5-win team because the quarterback wasn't good enough. But
he's a 21-year-old that could get better.
And looks like he will.
And probably
we've seen him improve already as a rookie. The point is, if you ended up this season 5-11, let's say even worse, let's say because of Saquon, because of no Saquon, it somehow mattered to the point of a couple of wins, right?
Yeah.
Let's say they won 3 games. Now they're sitting somewhere near the top of the draft, having had a terrible season but secured their franchise quarterback of the future. Now you've got the number 3 pick to be able to throw at whatever talent you want, whether it's a running back or, a top-quality player in another position. You're in a better position than you would be now, which is, okay, we've got a great running back who's made 0 difference to our win-loss total.
Right.
And now we need to find a quarterback with the 6th overall pick in the draft in a bad quarterback draft.
So primary cause of death.
Eli.
No.
Primary cause of death, picking the running back.
Oh, man. No, because that wouldn't have killed him for this year. Don't look at it through a 1-year lens. Because like you just said, if they had picked Sam Darnold, they're still probably a 5-win team. So the primary cause of death for this year is not the running back.
Fair enough. Okay, quarterback. The
Eli Manning.
The lack of a quarterback.
Number 2 is the defense.
And the defense or the offensive line? Because they're pretty terrible.
I just think the defense doesn't give them a shot against good teams week in, week out. We're 2 years removed from the defense really overachieving. Janoris Jenkins is playing great. Landon Collins, Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And, you don't have the same. We went into the season saying, who's rushing the passer? It's Olivier Vernon and no one.
Yeah.
That's what it was. B.J. Hill had a nice little rookie season.
How come the Giants can't find linebackers?
They don't try.
They don't try?
Okay, they tried. They found they tried with Alec Ogletree.
Yeah.
They got, outside of one random spectacular game where they saved him from trying to cover Tariq Cohen, they got what they paid for with Alec Ogletree, a guy that's graded well below average his entire career. B.J. Goodson's flashed a little bit, but I just think the pass rush, you don't have a good secondary.
Connor Barwin got
and the pass rush wasn't
snaps this season for them.
Yeah, still going. I mean, Lorenzo Carter was always a project in the 3rd round. Expectations couldn't have been too high for him. Dalvin Tomlinson up front on the D-line is what he is. He's a run stopper. He continued to do that well. Doesn't rush the passer. They traded Big Snacks. They just don't rush the passer well, and they don't have enough guys that consistently cover on the back end. I mean, as much as people are trying to get us to eat crow on our Janoris Jenkins analysis a couple years ago where we said, that's a risky signing back in 2016. He was awesome in 2016.
Right.
And he's just gone back to being, a mediocre corner, which is valuable in the NFL, but, it leads to some ups and downs, right?
Right. That season was a complete outlier in his overall career, and by far the best season of his career.
But that's my point. The whole 2016 Giants season
was
an outlier.
If you average out the 4 seasons with the Rams, his passer rating was like 100. He gave up basically 5 touchdowns a year. Gave up 60-odd% completion rate into his coverage and 750 say yards. Right.
Yep.
The 2016 season, where he's so spectacular, completion percentage dropped 15% to 50, which is pretty spectacular. His touchdowns, he still gave up 3, but that's still 2-3 less than he gave up otherwise. And his passer rating allowed dropped 40 points to 65. This season, 66% completion rate, 788 yards, which I think is a career high. Yep. 7 touchdowns, also a career high, and a passer rating of 109. So actually, he swung right back to the player he always was with the Rams.
Cornerback play is very inconsistent. So banking on that.
Did you keep a list of these people that were mocking us so we can go back and mock them? I
kept all the people that mocked us about Baker Mayfield, and I made sure to go.
You didn't do it for Janoris?
We could do a little search. We'll do a little Twitter search.
Perfect.
PFF sucks Janoris Jenkins. And
yes.
we'll do search like that
Perfect.
or whatever it is. So secondary cause of death is the defense. I'm going to say the back 7.
Okay.
Specific. The whole defense, because they couldn't rush the passer. They couldn't do anything.
Basically, it's Vernon and nobody else.
And then the offensive line
was bad.
Nate Solder, they paid him a ton of money to be mid-tier average.
Can I claim victory on that one? You were
is
trying to convince me that was a good move, and he was actually a good player.
This is the same exact thing as the Kirk Cousins argument. Supply and demand to get average. Supply and demand to become average.
Okay.
He was an average mid-tier left tackle. That's what he was.
I think are stretching the definition of average if we're throwing Nate Solder.
Will Hernandez, average as a rookie, which is encouraging. When you have there are guards, if guards look average mid-tier in the first year, that's a good sign. They generally progress pretty well, that position. Chad Wheeler was a disaster. Spencer Pulley struggled. Jamon Brown struggled. Patrick Omame, everybody. I mean, they got rid of Eric Flowers early. Everybody else struggled badly in pass protection this year.
Yeah.
One of the worst pass blocking grades in the NFL as a team. Mm-hmm. Did you get a Solder ranking? I saw you trying to look it up.
No, but he gave up 7 sacks.
That's a terrible way to evaluate offensive line.
That's the only way anybody knows, Steve. He gave up 7 sacks, so he was bad.
Therefore, he was bad.
Do you know that Colton Miller gave up 16 sacks as a rookie?
I do. It's not a great stat to use, but it's kind of a fun one sometimes when it's really, really bad. Where's Solder in our rankings just before the...
16 sacks for Colton Miller. 12 for Julian Davenport.
Solder's the number 27 pass blocking tackle. Now, it's not. That's not worth the money, but it's the same thing as... It's the same 21 overall.
Well, here's
it's
the question.
Same thing as Kirk Cousins.
So here's where I think it would be different to Kirk Cousins. Would the Giants have expected better than the 27th ranked pass blocking tackle?
Probably.
There you go.
There's very little in his history that should make you expect him to be better than Tyron Smith and Dwayne Brown and Joe Staley and Ryan Ramczyk and all these guys that are ahead of him.
His run blocking fell off a cliff. Your argument to me was that he's an average pass blocking left tackle, but a really good run blocker, and therefore he's a dramatic upgrade over Eric Flowers, which is probably true.
He was a dramatic upgrade over Eric Flowers. He absolutely was.
And it's a good signing for them. I put it to you, Stephen, that with 7 sacks surrendered, a below-average pass-blocking grade,
a massive upgrade over Eric Flowers,
and a run-blocking grade that fell off a cliff, it was a bad move. Didn't work.
It's still early. All right, we've done a lot of podcasting so far. Let's let's do more eulogies on YouTube this week.
Okay.
You want to do that?
Yeah, I like
So if
these.
your team...
Primary cause of death, secondary cause of death, tertiary cause of death.
Okay, I like
work.
Just like a quick season recap, what went wrong. We'll do more on YouTube this week, so if you didn't hear your favorite team's eulogy, check out the YouTube channel, search PFF, which is growing a lot. We appreciate everybody. If you guys haven't subscribed, if you're on the podcast, go subscribe to the PFF YouTube channel. We put out about 20 to 30 videos per week of content, so you can hear us nonstop. Should we talk about some of the rapid fire yesterday's games?
Well, hang on. How about forget about the games because
we
don't
care about the games.
Yeah, well, who cares? What about the coaching vacancies? Right? What's the best job?
Marvin Lewis just got fired, by the way.
Did he?
Breaking news.
Wow.
Marvin Lewis. I don't know if I wanted to say fired. There was probably some mutual agreement.
Mutual.
Marvin
ways.
Lewis is out. in Cincinnati.
Okay, so my question is, what is the best coaching vacancy that's opening up?
Browns.
The Browns?
Browns and Packers.
Browns and Packers. Just because the quarterback.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you got Rodgers, what's he, 36 or whatever he is? He's our age.
Wow.
Aaron Rodgers.
That's depressing.
Isn't that when you hit the age where like athletes are aging and it's like, oh, this guy's at the end of his career, and you're like, oh, he's my age.
I'm more concerned by the fact that his career earnings are, in the 9 digits, and ours are not. I don't know about you. I don't know what deal you've got at PFF, but I don't have a 9-figure deal here.
Ooh, you should probably renegotiate.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money being thrown around over here at PFF. I feel good. I don't feel intimidated by Aaron Rodgers.
You're in a contract year, right? You're going back to
I am in a contract year. My contract does expire in late March, so I'll be in. That's not him.
You're going to cash right in.
I'll be negotiating.
So this is where you make the Aaron Rodgers money?
I think this is it.
Okay.
Yeah. Unless I get franchise tagged.
Yeah.
That's franchise tag
right.
season.
Then you got to play it out on.
We'll see what Hornsby does
on a 1 year.
Collinsworth.
1 year guarantee.
I got my agent working with Collinsworth and Hornsby, trying to. I want the long-term deal. I want to be here at PFF.
Of course, who doesn't?
But look, you got to pay market rate, like better than market rate, like QB money is what I'm looking for.
QB money.
I would take long snapper money. Not gonna lie, I would take long snapper money.
Good long snapper money.
As long as it's not PFF money, I want long snapper money.
Okay.
I want that next tier.
I think at the very minimum, you want like mid-tier kicker money.
Ooh, that's a lot of money. That's
right?
7 figures.
A couple of mil a year.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty good.
I just work a couple of years and then sail off into the sunset.
Right.
I would definitely mail it in. You said yesterday in the office, I love your radical candor. If you got the big contract, you definitely would mail it in because you're watching Cousins screaming at Adam Thielen like, come on, man, run the right route, right? His motivational speeches.
Uh-huh.
And you're like, to be fair, he cares.
Right.
He's making $84 million guaranteed no matter what he does.
Yeah.
And you were like, man, if I was making that money, I would cash out. I would be a bad employee.
Right. I mean, if I got an $84 million guaranteed deal, I would not be working hard. I would mail it the hell in for the rest of that deal.
Note that to our bosses. Motivate Sam with money.
But not too much.
Not too much.
Yeah.
But don't give him too much.
The $84 million, I would just check out. I would be done.
See, I'm the other way. If you gave me $84 million, I would want to
justify
justify that. No, I would want to justify it. I would want to prove that your decision to pay me was a good
it's not
one.
so
I would
much,
work harder.
It's the guarantee that would get me, right? If you gave me an $84 million deal, but I had to earn it, that would be fine. But if it was 84 guaranteed, I would be
just don't give you guarantees. So give you good bonus structure.
Like I'm done. Like I got $84 million in the bank. Whatever happens to me, I'm good.
You need a good bonus structure.
Yeah.
Is what
I just need it needs to be properly incentivized. Otherwise, I'm checking out.
Oh, that's fair. Again, radical candor. I appreciate it. We might have to do an emergency pod or an emergency video on the open head coaching vacancies. We're running low on time. Nobody wants an hour and a half long podcast.
No. I was asking the question, which one? You've already answered it. You think the Browns or the Packers? Because
am I missing one? That's good there.
I mean, Denver opened up. That's awful. Tampa Bay, pretty bad. The Jets, they've got a quarterback potentially.
The Jets, but I think
you just don't want to be in a division with Brady.
Yeah,
for the next 9 years,
9 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. When you've got, I don't know that Todd Bowles did a bad job. Is the thing. That's what I struggle with. Yeah. I don't know that
they've got
a
lot
coach.
Less talent than the Browns or the Packers.
That's my issue. The Browns have talent, and the only thing that would keep you from the Browns is if you think that the ownership has some sort of curse on them and they just can't that they just can't win. We have Tyler over here as Browns fans. Like, I don't know, maybe, but you got Baker and you have talent on both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
Right. You have something to build around. Green Bay, you've got an extra first-round pick this year. You've got the youth that they added in the secondary. You've got Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, David Bakhtiari. You've got some pillars to build around there.
Dolphins, Cardinals.
No Cardinals. Oh, gosh.
Bengals. That's basically it, I think.
Bengals are an interesting one now because they probably move on from Dalton, right? Next coach comes in. They move on from Dalton. Dalton goes down to Jacksonville. We're gonna have to have a whole QB carousel.
I can't deal. Your entire mind is just like sending quarterbacks from one team to the next.
That's what the offseason's going to be. I think Dalton's going to move somewhere. Jameis could move somewhere. Do the Raiders really believe in Derek Carr?
I want to see how many
Carr
teams.
Believes in Derek Carr.
I want to see how many teams you can structure in a player-for-player straight swap. where
All right,
it's just like
we'll go map
it's
it
like
out.
a 12-team trade where Steve just sends every mediocre quarterback from one team to the next.
Yeah, it's great. We'll go map it out. All right, we're going to wrap it up. Listen,
Okay.
Here's the deal. Thursday, our podcast, maybe we'll get it out early on Thursday. We'll try to get it out earlier for everybody. We're going to preview the weekend, okay? We'll preview Wild Card Weekend. We'll give you our playoff preview this week. The autopsy thing, I think we take them to YouTube. We'll do a few more teams, and we'll hit on some of the big stories. So go check them out on YouTube. We'll podcast, we'll preview next week. The other thing I need to ask the listeners, do you guys want draft content? Do you guys want us to start our draft? Because I can grab Renner, who's been doing a lot of work on the draft, get him in here for 20 minutes, 20, 25 minutes on Thursday, and we can just do just start laying the groundwork for some draft content. So I want the feedback on that, either YouTube comments or on Twitter if you guys are listening to the pod. Let us know if you guys want us to start moving forward to the draft, because eventually we're going to be doing that. At least once a week, one of the podcasts will be dedicated to the NFL draft. That all sound good?
Yeah, sounds excellent.
Anything
Steve.
else you want to hit?
No, I'm good.
All right, guys, if you guys want all the grades and stats, go grab PFF Elite. It's over at profootballfocus.com. Please, when you subscribe, you get 365 days of access, so you'll have it for you'll have it for next season. You just get in early. Just have it, right? You have all the grades and stats, so you know what's happening for free agency. You get the draft guide for the draft, and then you have it for the entire season.
Yeah, free agency is a really useful time to have premium stats, because obviously your team's going to bring in a bunch of people, or at least some people, and you'll have all their grades. You'll have grades, stats, history on all these players. It's it's a great time to get in. So everyone thinks that the NFL season's finished. I'm done. I don't need premium stats anymore. Actually, free agency is where we get the biggest spike in usership.
Yeah, it's great. So
Is
go do it.
usership a word?
It is now.
Excellent.
Let's wrap it up. All right, guys. We'll see you on Thursday. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Yeah, let us know.